The bitter scent of old paper and dust filled my nostrils, a suffocating shroud in the stifling attic air. My fingers, trembling with a mixture of disbelief and growing dread, traced the faded cursive on the yellowed document. It was dated just months before my parents passed away, a neatly typed, legal-looking will, completely unlike the one they had read to me years ago. My eyes fixated on a single, shocking phrase: "I bequeath all my worldly possessions to my beloved cousin, Bartholomew Finch." Bartholomew. The name echoed in my mind, a cruel, mocking whisper. Bartholomew, whom my parents barely spoke of, a man they had not seen in decades. A wave of nausea washed over me, hot and dizzying. This was impossible. This was wrong. This was a violation of everything I believed to be true. My parents, my kind, loving, fair parents, would never have done this. A cold, hard knot of fear tightened in my stomach, quickly replaced by a furious, icy resolve. Someone had done this. Someone had manipulated my parents, or worse. The truth, I knew then with absolute certainty, was buried deep beneath layers of deceit, and I would dig until I found every last splinter of it, no matter how painful, no matter how long it took. My name is Eleanor, and I am 62 years old. For decades, I lived a life built on the bedrock of familial love and trust, believing my parents' legacy would naturally pass to me, their only child. Then, a few months ago, while sifting through old boxes in their attic, I stumbled upon a second will, one I had never seen, completely disinheriting me in favor of a distant cousin, Bartholomew Finch. This man, a shadowy figure from the periphery of our family history, was now poised to claim everything my parents had worked for their entire lives. The original will, meticulously crafted and witnessed, had clearly stated that their entire estate was to be mine. This new document, bearing my parents' signatures, felt like a betrayal from beyond the grave, a cruel trick that defied every fiber of my being. Bartholomew, I vowed silently, would not get away with this. I would uncover the truth behind this fraudulent document, expose his manipulation, and reclaim the inheritance that was rightfully mine. I grew up in a small, idyllic town, nestled in the heart of the countryside. My parents, Arthur and Clara, were the pillars of our community. My father was a hard-working carpenter, his hands calloused from years of shaping wood into beautiful, lasting structures. My mother, a gentle and graceful woman, managed a small local bookstore, her passion for literature infectious. They were not wealthy in the conventional sense, but they were rich in love, integrity, and the respect of everyone who knew them. Our home, a charming two-story house with a sprawling garden, was always filled with laughter, the aroma of my mother's baking, and the comforting scent of freshly cut wood from my father's workshop. I was an only child, cherished and adored, and I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that I was the center of their world, just as they were the center of mine. My childhood was idyllic, a tapestry woven with sun-drenched afternoons spent reading in my mother's bookstore, and evenings listening to my father's stories of the trees he felled and the homes he built. They instilled in me strong values: honesty, hard work, kindness, and the importance of family. They taught me to stand up for what was right, to speak my mind, and to never give up on my dreams. My parents were my role models, my confidants, and my greatest cheerleaders. They supported me through every triumph and every setback, their belief in me unwavering. When I decided to pursue a career in teaching, they were my staunchest advocates, helping me pay for university and celebrating every milestone along the way. I loved them fiercely, and our bond was unbreakable, or so I believed. After graduating, I returned to our hometown, eager to contribute to the community that had nurtured me. I secured a teaching position at the local elementary school, a job I adored. My parents were immensely proud, their eyes gleaming with satisfaction every time I spoke of my students. I dedicated my life to my work, finding immense joy in shaping young minds and to caring for my aging parents. As they grew older, their health began to decline, and I became their primary caregiver. I managed their doctor's appointments, cooked their favorite meals, and ensured they had the comfort and peace they deserved. My parents had always been very organized individuals, especially concerning their finances. My father, a practical man, believed in keeping everything in order. Several years before their passing, they invited me into the living room, where, seated at the old oak table, they proudly read me their will. I remember every aspect of it. Their voices were soft, but filled with certainty as they explained how everything they owned, including the house, their savings, and a small plot of land outside of town, would be passed down to me. "You are our only child, Eleanor," my father said, looking directly into my eyes. "All of this is meant for you. We want you to be secure and for our home to remain in the family." My mother added, her hand gently touching mine, "We know you will take care of everything. You have always been responsible." It was not about money for me, but a confirmation of our love, our family legacy. I was touched by their trust and affection, and their will was not just a legal document, but a symbol of our unity. I even witnessed them signing it, and then their two close friends, whom they had invited to the house specifically for this purpose, attested to it. Everything was done properly, openly, without a hint of secrecy. One of the first unsettling signs emerged when my mother began showing symptoms of dementia. Initially, these were minor memory lapses, forgotten names, or repeated stories. But gradually, these moments became more frequent and alarming. She began to confuse dates, forget appointments, and sometimes even lose her train of thought during conversations. My father, always her rock, became her tireless caregiver, his face strained with worry. It was heartbreaking to watch my vibrant, intelligent mother slowly fade away. Around this time, a few years before their deaths, Bartholomew Finch started to reappear. I had a very vague memory of him from childhood, a distant cousin who lived in a neighboring town and rarely showed up at family gatherings. He suddenly began calling my parents, sending cards, and then making appearances at our home. My parents, especially my mother in her declining state, seemed bewildered by his sudden attention. I remember my mother once commenting, "Bartholomew has become so attentive lately." My father merely frowned. I did not give it much thought at the time, attributing his attention simply to his sense of family, as he called it. I was so engrossed in caring for my parents and my life's work that I failed to notice the subtle shifts in their lives, shifts that would later prove to be far more sinister than I could ever have imagined. My parents' deaths were a double tragedy. They passed away just 6 months apart, my father first from a sudden heart attack, and then my mother, whose health rapidly deteriorated without him. The grief was unbearable, and I felt as though a part of me had also died with them. In the months that followed, I was submerged in sorrow, handling funeral arrangements and simply trying to survive each day. The question of their will was the last thing on my mind. I knew everything was in order, and I did not need to worry about financial matters. This was my home, my inheritance, a symbol of their love, and it gave me a certain sense of security in the ocean of my grief. About 6 months after my mother's passing, I decided it was time to start going through their belongings. It was a painful process, every item bringing back memories, every corner of the house filled with their presence. One rainy afternoon, as I sorted through an attic storage closet filled with old documents and keepsakes, I stumbled upon a small, leather-bound box, hidden behind a stack of antique books. I remembered this box. It was my father's strongbox for important papers, which he always kept locked. I had never seen it open, and it piqued my curiosity. The lock was broken, and I easily opened it. Inside, amidst old letters and faded photographs, lay a thick, folded document, tied with a red ribbon. My heart quickened its pace. It looked like an important legal document. When I unfolded it, I saw the familiar font and formatting typical of a will. But the heading, Last Will and Testament, immediately sent a jolt of alarm through me. It was the same heading as the original will, but something was off. My eyes then scanned the text. I expected to see my name as the sole beneficiary, affirmed and signed by my parents. Instead, my gaze halted on the name Bartholomew Finch. I reread it, then again and again, my breath caught in my throat. I bequeath all my property, real and personal, as well as all my savings and investments, to my beloved cousin, Bartholomew Finch. The words felt unreal, written in some strange, horrifying language. This was not just a change, it was a complete, unconditional exclusion of me. I felt a cold current run down my spine. The hands that held the document began to tremble. I searched for my parents' signatures, and they were there, faint but recognizable. Next, I looked for the date. It was only 3 months before my father's death and 9 months before my mother's passing. At that time, my mother was already very frail, her dementia significantly advanced, and she barely recognized me sometimes. My parents would never have changed their will like this without telling me. It was impossible. They were too honest, too loving. Suddenly, all those moments I had previously dismissed as strange coincidences flared in my mind with a new, sinister clarity. The frequent visits of Bartholomew, his excessive attention to my parents in their last years, his unusual eagerness to help with their financial affairs, which I had not paid much attention to at the time because I was consumed with other worries. I recalled Bartholomew's persistent offers to help my parents organize their papers, especially after my mother began to fall ill. He always seemed so pleasant, so caring. I never imagined that beneath that mask of benevolence lay something so terrible. This document, this fraudulent will, was his true face, etched onto paper. A bitter taste of betrayal filled my mouth. This was not merely a legal document, it was an act of deception, perpetrated against my own parents and against me. I felt a cold resolve building in my chest. I would expose him. I would show the world who he truly was. The first blow came when I attempted to contact my parents' lawyer, a Mistress Anderson. She was a trustworthy woman who had handled all their legal matters for many years. I was certain she would be able to shed light on this strange situation and confirm that this second will was a fraud. I called her, hoping for a swift resolution. Her secretary informed me that Mistress Anderson had recently retired and moved to another country to be closer to her grandchildren. This was unexpected and caused a slight annoyance, but no alarm. I assumed I would simply need to find a new lawyer. However, when I called Mistress Anderson's office to request a copy of the original will, the secretary informed me that all records pertaining to my parents had been transferred to a new lawyer, a Mr. Gregory Shaw, who had taken over her practice. I felt a slight prick of unease. Why were all the records transferred without my knowledge? I called Mr. Shaw, explaining the situation and asking for a copy of my parents' original will, the one that left everything to me. His voice was cold and official. He informed me that the only will he had in his records was the one leaving everything to Bartholomew Finch. He stated that any other will, if it existed, would have been nullified by this last document. My heart sank. He did not believe me. He was not even willing to look. I explained to him about my mother's dementia at the time this second will was signed, and how uncharacteristic it would be for my parents to do such a thing. He merely reiterated that he had to go by the last registered document. This was the first real warning sign that Bartholomew was not just accidentally found this will. He was involved in its creation. This was an organized attack, not a simple mistake. The second blow came from my parents' neighbors, Lisa and Tom, with whom they had been friends for decades. They were the ones who had witnessed the original will. I approached them, hoping they could corroborate my story. When I arrived at their home, their faces were strained and their gazes were distant. I told them about the second will and asked if they remembered witnessing the original one. Lisa exchanged a look with Tom and then slowly said, "Eleanor, we remember Arthur and Clara talking about wanting to leave everything to you. But we never witnessed any will." My jaw dropped. I was stunned. It was impossible. I distinctly remembered them sitting in the living room, signing the document along with my parents. I even remembered Lisa joking about needing her reading glasses to see the small print. Their refusal to confirm what I knew to be true was a shock to my system. I felt a cold, stinging fear course through me. Could my memories be so utterly wrong? Or were they coerced into silence? Their behavior was so uncharacteristic, so unkind. I tried to persuade them, reminding them of specific details of that day, but they just shook their heads, their eyes avoiding mine. "We just don't remember it, Eleanor," Tom repeated, his voice unusually cold. In that moment, I realized that Bartholomew had far-reaching tentacles, more than I could have ever imagined. He had somehow gotten to my parents, and now to their closest friends. This was no longer a simple matter of proving fraud. This was a battle against an organized lie. I felt so alone, so helpless. The third blow was the most painful because it revealed just how deeply Bartholomew had infiltrated my parents' lives. I decided to examine their bank accounts and financial transactions from recent years. This was not easy, as most of their records were in paper form. I spent days sifting through old statements, bills, and receipts. What I found was shocking. Over the last few years, especially after my mother's dementia worsened, significant sums of money had disappeared from their accounts. These were large transfers, going to an account I did not recognize. I felt my heart clench with each new discovery. This money was their savings, their retirement, their security. Where had it gone? Then I noticed recurring small monthly payments, labeled as property management fees or consulting services. These payments went to an account belonging to a firm that, as I later discovered, was linked to Bartholomew Finch. It seemed he was not merely waiting for their inheritance. He had already been systematically plundering them while they were vulnerable. Most astonishingly, these payments coincided with his visits. He would come, provide some assistance, and soon after, money would disappear. I remembered Bartholomew insisting on helping my parents with their finances, saying he just wanted to make sure they were all right. I had taken it as kindness then. Now I saw it as cunning manipulation. This was the final and most profound humiliation. He had not only attempted to steal their legacy after their death, but he had also drained their resources while they were alive, exploiting their trust and my mother's illness. This information ignited a new wave of fury and determination within me. I did not just want my inheritance back. I wanted justice for my parents, who had been so shamelessly exploited. My hope alternated with despair. At times, I felt utterly exhausted, almost ready to give up, but then I would think of my parents' faces, their kindness and trust, and that would renew my resolve. I felt I had to fight not only for myself, but for their memory. I knew I needed a public platform to expose Bartholomew. A simple legal battle could drag on for years and exhaust my modest resources. I needed a way to reveal his deception quickly, powerfully, and in a way that he could not hide from. My neighbor, Margaret, a longtime family friend, was the head of the local charity organization that hosted a large annual fundraising gala. It was a significant event, attended by all the town's most influential people, including lawyers, bankers, local politicians, and journalists from the local papers. Bartholomew, it turned out, had recently become quite active in local society, demonstrating a false generosity and trying to ingratiate himself with the right people. He was certain to be there as one of the honored guests. This was my chance. I meticulously planned every step. I gathered all my evidence, a copy of the fraudulent will, the bank statements showing suspicious transfers, the letters Bartholomew had sent my parents, even call logs. I hired a private investigator who tracked down Mistress Anderson's former secretary, who confirmed that Mistress Anderson indeed possessed the original will and that Bartholomew had approached her multiple times, attempting to get information about it. This corroboration added significant weight to my accusations. I then approached a local reporter who worked for a small but respected newspaper. At first, he was skeptical, but when I showed him the evidence, his eyes widened. He agreed to be present at the gala and write an article if my accusations proved true. The night of the charity ball arrived. The grand hall was adorned with exquisite flowers, and a soft hum of conversation filled the air. I dressed in my best gown, but beneath its silken fabric, my heart pounded wildly. I felt both terrified and resolute. I spotted Bartholomew across the room. He stood near the drinks table, laughing with a group of influential people, his face a picture of self-satisfaction. His appearance had always been deceptive. He looked like a kindly uncle, but beneath that facade lay a cold, calculating soul. When it was time for the speeches, Margaret went up to the stage to thank everyone for their generosity. She spoke of the donations and the importance of supporting the local community. After her speech, I asked for the floor. Margaret, aware of my struggles but not knowing all the details, gave me a surprised look but then nodded. She was a good woman. I walked onto the stage, my legs trembling slightly. All eyes turned to me. I saw Bartholomew, who until that moment had not noticed me, suddenly lift his head, his eyes meeting mine. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, and then he quickly looked away, trying to appear nonchalant. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," I began. My voice was even, despite the tremor inside. "My name is Eleanor, and I am the only daughter of Arthur and Clara Smith, your respected fellow citizens who, sadly, recently passed away." I made a pause, allowing their names to resonate through the hall. Many nodded. Some of them had known my parents personally. My parents, as many of you know, were people of great honor and generosity. They worked their entire lives to build a strong legacy, which they believed they were leaving to me, their only child. I took out the copy of the fraudulent will from the folder I was holding. However, after their passing, a document was discovered which claims they had completely changed their will, transferring all their assets to their distant cousin, Mr. Bartholomew Finch. A murmur rippled through the hall. All eyes turned to Bartholomew, who suddenly went pale as a sheet. He tried to make a break for it, pushing through the crowd, but I was ready. I gestured to the reporter, who stepped forward, ready to capture his reaction. "I have proof," I continued, my voice growing stronger as I felt the mounting power. "Proof that this will was falsified and that my distant cousin, Mr. Finch, exploited my mother's illness and vulnerability to defraud them. I have bank statements showing how he systematically drained money from their accounts, pretending to help them. I have testimony from Mistress Anderson's former secretary, who can confirm his attempts to gain information about the original will." I held up the bank statements in the air for all to see. The shock was palpable. Some people began to whisper, others stared at Bartholomew with undisguised contempt. Bartholomew, who was cornered, tried to deny it. "This is all lies," he shrieked, his voice trembling with fury. "She's just bitter that she didn't get the inheritance." "I am not bitter." "Mr. Finch," I retorted, looking him directly in the eyes. "I am fighting for justice for my parents, who were victims of your greed and deceit. And I have the evidence to prove it. I have testimony that the original will existed, and that it was destroyed by you. I have proof that you took advantage of their trust when my mother was no longer able to make decisions." I felt power surge through my body. This was my moment. Suddenly, one of the guests, an elderly woman who was seated in the front row, raised her hand. "I remember," she said. Her voice was loud and clear. "I remember Arthur and Clara talking about their will. They always said Eleanor would inherit everything. They even showed me a copy of that first will, many years ago." This was an unexpected corroboration. Then another guest, a man who worked at the bank where my parents had their accounts, stood up. "We had noticed some unusual transactions on Mr. and Mr. Smith's accounts in recent months, but could not disclose information due to confidentiality. However, if there is an official investigation, we are ready to cooperate." Bartholomew felt the ground crumble beneath his feet. His face turned ashen, and he bolted for the exit, trying to escape the multitude of eyes fixed upon him. "He's a thief," someone shouted from the crowd. "A swindler." The crowd began to part as he shoved his way towards the doors, leaving a trail of shame and contempt in his wake. I stood on the stage, watching his retreat, and felt a heavy burden lift from my shoulders. This was not just a triumph, it was a release. Justice, though slow, had finally begun to bloom. A year has passed since the day I exposed Bartholomew Finch at the charity gala. The repercussions were far-reaching. The reporter who was present wrote a comprehensive article detailing my story and the evidence I provided. The story quickly spread, generating outrage and sympathy for my plight. The lawyer who had previously refused to take my case, Mr. Shaw, faced with public pressure and new evidence, was forced to reconsider. He swiftly reinstated the original will and filed a lawsuit on my behalf, seeking to nullify the fraudulent document. The case was resolved in my favor within a few months. Bartholomew Finch was found guilty of fraud and of exploiting my parents' vulnerable state. His reputation was utterly destroyed, and he faced not only civil lawsuits, but also criminal charges. He lost everything, including any standing he had in society, and was forced to return all the money he had illegally obtained from my parents. As far as I know, he left town and has never reappeared. I reclaimed my home, my parents' legacy, and most importantly, their honor. It was not merely the return of property, it was the restoration of truth. My neighbors, Lisa and Tom, eventually reached out to me. There were many apologies on their part. They confessed that Bartholomew had threatened them if they spoke the truth, and they, fearing for their safety, had chosen to remain silent. I understood their fear, and though it was difficult, I forgave them. Our friendship gradually resumed, although with a slight shadow of the past. I continued to teach at the local school, finding great joy in my daily interactions with my students. My parents' home is now once again filled with love and peace, free from the shadow of deceit. I often walk through their garden, remembering them, and feel their presence in every blossom, in every tree. I placed a small memorial plaque in their garden to honor their memory and to remind myself of the power of truth. This story taught me that appearances can be deceiving and that greed can twist even the closest relationships. It also taught me that the truth will always find its way out, even if it takes a long time and much effort. The most important lesson is never to underestimate your own strength and determination. When faced with injustice, it is important to fight, not just for yourself, but for those who cannot fight for themselves. My story stands as a testament that, even in the darkest of times, hope and justice can prevail. But it makes me wonder, how many more such stories remain untold? How many people have been deceived and stripped of their inheritance or dignity? How can we better protect our elderly relatives from such predators who hide behind a mask of benevolence? These are questions worth pondering for everyone.